Mount Eerie is the recording project of singer-songwriter Phil Elverum. He has been in the game for years. He was once in the band The Microphones. They released The Glow Part 2, which is now considered a undeniable indie folk classic. I absolutely agree. I think it's one of the better albums of the 2000s, easily. And he has been recording under the Mount Eerie name since like 2004, 2005, I believe. I would say that Mount Eerie hasn't seen as much critical acclaim. I do feel as though quite a lot of Mount Eerie albums have sort of been ignored and sort of left by the wayside. But Phil Elverum himself does have this dedicated fan base, and last year he dropped A Crow Looked at Me, which completely shook the music world like crazy. It was an album that was focusing on the death of Phil Elverum's wife. It was a very just vivid and real album, just displaying all his emotions throughout the time that his wife has died and all the things that he's been doing and all the thoughts and feelings. It was just awful, honestly. It was an awful listen, but it really hit you hard. Many people called it the best album of last year. I, for one, didn't feel that I could return to it very much because of the deep subject matter. It was pretty hard to stomach, and I think anyone that loved that album will admit that too. But most people were appreciating the art that was crafted by this man because it was on another level. It wasn't just like a heartbreaking album, it just destroyed your fucking soul. However, it's also important to note that A Crow Looked at Me really was the album equivalent to the film Moonlight, in the sense that the subject matter of both of those pieces of art were garnering the critical acclaim more as opposed to the actual content of the pieces of art. Not necessarily a terrible thing, as both of the pieces of art were very good. Moonlight is a great film. A Crow Looked at Me is a great album. It's just that you could tell that people were hesitant to critique both of those pieces of art because of how dark and deep the subject matter was. Like, people didn't really want to say that they didn't like A Crow Looked at Me because it comes across as a little bit harsh and a little bit unfair because of the feelings and the emotions that Phil Elverum were going through whilst recording the album. But at the end of the day, you know, you can critique Moonlight without it being unfair to the subject matter of the film. It was a very important subject matter, but there were still flaws. I mean, Mahershala Ali really should have been on screen way more than he was. The film wrapped itself up a little bit too quickly at the end for my taste. I would like to see that story fleshed out between him and the guy. And the album Crow Looked at Me, again, did have critiques to it that were fair because it's a very hard album to listen to, and honestly, do I ever want to return to it? I don't think I do, no. And I think that people were instantly slapping high praise and high grades and high scores on the album without really understanding that while you were listening to it, were you honestly enjoying it? And I know art is not just about enjoyment. I appreciate the album a lot. It's very, very vivid in the details, and Phil Elverum just talks about some things that are so hard to hear, and I know for a fact that anyone that has lost anyone will hear that album and feel a lot of emotions towards it. But again, you know, it's just so hard to listen to that I just don't know if people honestly enjoyed it as much as they said they did. However, though, with this new album, it's not quite the same with the lyrics this time around. It's not quite as hard to hear. It is a little bit more accessible. It's a little bit more easier to stomach, but at the same time I don't really feel that much enjoyment from this either. Musically, honestly, this is a very dull album. Like, I really don't think there is anything going on here in the music that's worth my time. I feel like I've heard this all before. It's just kind of an acoustic album that doesn't really push any boundaries with the instrumentation. It's kind of flavourless. It's a little bit redundant. Each track is very hard to separate from the previous track because it's just very similar. The track Now Only is a little bit more upbeat with its instrumentation. It's not just an acoustic guitar all the way through. But still, I don't really feel like there's anything to this track that makes me want to return to it. The track picks up on the chorus right as Phil Elverum says, "People get cancer and die." And I'm just. It's just like, oh. 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 It's horrible. It's just so hard to listen to a line like that. Like, it's too real. I can't listen to music that's too real. I want to listen to music to escape the emotions of everyday life. I can't listen to that. People living their lives just get erased for no reason. It's like, it's just too horrific to listen to. It's too real. Like, I can't. I mean, yeah, his songwriting is good. It's not like throughout this album I'm listening to the lyrics and thinking, oh god, he's terrible at writing these lyrics. He is the most honest songwriter around, honestly. He has been through it all. He knows the actual emotions that you would go through horrible experiences, but just listening to that in the form of music, it's hard. And I think that his deadpan delivery is intentional. I think the fact that he shows a lack of emotion throughout his music is obviously on purpose. I mean, he is just showing how hard things can be, and he is showing the opposite side to things, that where like a lot of artists may do a sad album, but they may have a bit more liveliness to the music, like a Touche Amore with their last album, Stage 4. It was a very melodic album, but the subject was very dark. But I think he's trying to show the other side to it, where like, actually there's no positivity in this. When you go through this experience, there's nothing that you can take from it that's good. And I think he's depicting that in a very clever way. At the same time though, it's not really something that I want to hear. And it's not really something that's very exciting to listen to. I mean, Sharon Van Etten puts in so much emotion in her voice, you know? And you feel the emotions, where listening to Phil Elverum, I feel nothing. It's kind of weird. Like, it makes you, it fills you up with this empty void. Like, you feel everything kind of, like, you're not, it's not everything's escaping you. It's filling you up with nothingness. Whereas, like, a Joni Mitchell or a Nick Cave would actually give you something more than just that. Or in fact, even a Nick Drake. I feel like Nick Drake does this kind of thing much better, because at least the music is melodically interesting, and he does so many things with his arrangements. There's so much going on, whereas with the Mount Eerie album, I feel like there's just nothing in the background except for an acoustic guitar. I'm not trying to take away from the experience that he's had, but we can't act like this is pushing musical boundaries when it really isn't. I mean, like I've mentioned a slew of artists there that do this kind of thing with more interesting music. And then we also have an artist like Sun Kill Moon, who again actually puts interesting arrangements and compositions in the music, whereas everything on this album to me just feels like it's void of anything. I think the poetry on this album is incredible though, especially on the last track, Crow Part 2, which of course is that reference to the closing track on A Crow Looked at Me, titled Crow. I guess it's sort of like the next step of where he's at now. And some of his lyrics are honestly remarkable. Like, he makes some lines about his own child on this track, and just the idea of that must be like awful to, you know, have like your wife die and you still have your child, and how your child goes through this, but at the same time you're going through something that you can't deal with. Like, it must be the worst possible thing to ever happen to someone, and I can't help but feel sympathy towards Phil Elverum, honestly. And I think Phil Elverum has been left in a situation where, from his perspective, nothing can ever get better from here. And I know people who've lost people as well, and they also have this attitude towards life where things are just never going to improve. And in a way it is right, you know, if you lose someone close to you, things don't really ever get better. People say that, but it's really only time that improves. Like, as time moves on, your emotions get less intense, but it's always going to be there, you know. The loss of that person that was so important to you is always going to be lingering in the back of your mind. And I think that Phil Elverum is just at a point where he has no one in his life to sort of bring him out of that emotion. So hearing him constantly sing about these horrific things is mostly just a testament to how his life is currently going, because there isn't really anyone there to really bring out that positivity. I do appreciate how he's able to record this to music. I would imagine that music is his escape, honestly, from the real world, and you know, this is where he can go to put these emotions into art, and it might help him go through the experiences that he's going through, as he may not have anyone to confide in. It's just that it's very difficult to listen to, and with the music not being that interesting, I don't know if I can say this album is really that great or it's as good as A Crow Looked at Me. And as much as I was critiquing A Crow Looked at Me at the start of this video, it was an album that really did change music in a way, and how we sort of perceive how heartbreaking albums can be recorded. It was something that I don't think we've ever really heard before, whereas this is something I feel like we have heard before, and it's just not quite as an experience, I don't think. A Crow Looked at Me made you feel something that you've never really felt before while listening to music, whereas this is something that just makes you feel like you don't really want to hear it. And I don't know what the difference is, but for me it's quite a big difference, and for some reason I find it harder to come back to this album, because I guess it's just musically a little bit dull. So for me, it's okay though. It's an okay album. I'm going to say C-. I do sort of hope that Phil Elverum finds something in his life that he can sort of latch onto and see positivity in, because he is going through something that not many people can say they're going through, and it must be very tough. So yeah, do let me know your thoughts on this album. It's not that it's a bad album, it's just a bit hard to listen to, and I don't know if I get that much enjoyment out of it, honestly. But yeah, let me know your thoughts. Subscribe to the channel for more reviews, and have a good day.